Bible Verse Daily. Learn one verse every day. If you have ever watched a professional athlete point to the sky after a touchdown and quote Philippians chapter 4 verse 13, you have seen one of the most widespread misreadings of Scripture in modern history. The verse has appeared on black locker room walls, pre-game speeches, and motivational posters for decades, but when you go back to the original context, what Paul actually wrote has almost nothing to do with athletic achievement or personal ambition. This is not a verse about doing hard things. It is not a verse about pushing past limits. It is not a verse about winning. Paul wrote these words from a Roman prison cell, chained to a guard, awaiting a trial that could end in his execution. He was not pumping himself up for a challenge. He was describing something he had learned over years of hardship, namely that he could face any circumstance from abundance to poverty, from freedom to chains, because Christ gave him an interior stability that external conditions could not touch. The verse is about contentment in suffering, not conquest in competition. Understanding that changes everything about how you read it. The letter to the Philippians is widely considered the most joyful piece of writing in the entire New Testament, which is striking when you understand the circumstances. Paul wrote it around 61 to 62 AD while under house arrest in Rome, or possibly from a prison in Ephesus, depending on which scholars you follow. Either way, he was not free. He was confined, guarded, and facing real legal jeopardy. The church in Philippi had sent a man named Epaphroditus with a financial gift to support Paul, and this letter is largely Paul's thank you note. Philippi itself was a Roman colony in Macedonia, modern-day northern Greece, founded by veterans of Roman legions. The church there was founded during Paul's second missionary journey, described in Acts 16 when he and Silas were themselves thrown in prison after casting out a spirit from a slave girl. So both Paul and the Philippians had a shared history with imprisonment and hardship. The church knew what it meant to suffer for their faith, and Paul was writing to them as someone living that reality in real time, not someone looking back on it from safety. The key word in Philippians chapter 4 verse 13 is actually in verse 11, just 2 verses before, and it changes the entire meaning of what follows. Paul writes, "I have learned, in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." The Greek word for content is autarx, which comes from the Stoic philosophical tradition and means self-sufficient, not in a proud or independent way, but in the sense of not needing external conditions to be favorable in order to function well. Paul takes that Stoic concept and reframes it completely. He says this sufficiency does not come from within himself, it comes from Christ. Then in verse 13 the Greek literally reads, "I can do all things through the one who empowers me." The verb is endunamouti, meaning the one who continuously strengthens. It is present tense, ongoing. And the all things, the panta, is tightly bound to the context he has just given. The all things refers to all the circumstances he has listed. Being hungry, being full, having much, having little. All of these, not all achievements, are what Paul says he can navigate through Christ's empowerment. Across the history of Christian interpretation, Philippians chapter 4 verse 13 has been read in strikingly different ways. The early church fathers, including John Chrysostom, emphasized the verse in the context of suffering and martyrdom. For them, the strength Christ provides was the courage to face death rather than deny the faith. That reading kept the verse anchored in its original context of persecution and hardship. During the Reformation, Luther and Calvin both understood the passage as a statement about spiritual sufficiency in all conditions, the kind of contentment that does not depend on prosperous circumstances. This resonated with communities that faced exile and persecution for their beliefs. In the 20th century, the prosperity gospel movement took the verse in a very different direction, using it to support the idea that faith empowers believers to achieve extraordinary things materially and professionally. Many biblical scholars push back firmly on that reading, arguing it strips the verse of its context entirely. At the same time, even mainstream evangelical Christianity has sometimes used it more broadly than the original meaning supports. The most careful reading keeps it where Paul put it, inside a discussion of financial hardship and imprisonment, and understands the strength as the ability to endure with peace, not to conquer with power. When you understand what Paul was actually saying, the verse becomes more useful, not less. Because most of us do not need a verse to help us win. What we need is something to hold on to when circumstances are out of our control, when the job does not come through, when the relationship does not work out, when the health report is not what we hoped, when we are in a season of having very little and feeling very small. That is exactly where Paul was sitting when he wrote this. And what he offers is not a guarantee that things will go your way. He offers something rarer and more durable, the knowledge that you can survive whatever comes, not because you are strong enough on your own, but because Christ continuously supplies what you lack. The practical application here is to be honest about what you are actually facing. If you are using this verse to pump yourself up for a competition, you are borrowing meaning that was never intended for that purpose. But if you are in a hard stretch and you need something to anchor your peace, you are reading it in exactly the spirit Paul wrote it. The strength he describes is the ability to hold steady, not to dominate. Philippians chapter 4 verse 13 is not a verse about limitless human achievement powered by faith. It is Paul's testimony from a prison cell that Christ gives him the interior strength to be at peace in any external condition. The all things he can do refers to all circumstances he can endure, from abundance to poverty, from freedom to chains. The strength is ongoing, present tense, supplied by Christ continuously. When you read it in context, it is a far more honest and far more useful promise than the motivational poster version. If this verse study helped you go deeper, please like, comment, and subscribe to Bible Verse Daily for a new verse study every week. Hit the bell notification so you never miss one. New verse studies every week.